The Retirement Cafe podcast. Make digital assets part of your estate plan with Jennifer Zegel. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Retirement Cafe podcast with me, your host, Justin King. If you're thinking about your retirement or already retired, you're in the right place. My aim is to help you plan for and live a successful and meaningful retirement. Retirement is far more than just a financial event. It's a significant life event, a major transition, which will bring with it new challenges and opportunities. So each episode contains tips, information, and inspiration to help you feel more informed and confident about your retirement. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode where I'm excited to be joined by Jennifer Zegel. Jennifer is a US lawyer specialising in estates and trusts, but what makes her unique is that over the years she's become an expert in digital asset planning. As an expert in this rapidly growing and increasingly complex area, Jennifer is a sought-after speaker on digital assets and blockchain technology. She spends her time advising clients on how to build digital asset planning into their estate plan. In our conversation, Jennifer shares steps you can consider when reviewing your own digital assets, starting with explaining what digital assets are, as it includes everything from emails, texts, photographs, and videos, to cryptocurrency, gaming tokens, YouTube royalties, and social media accounts. We also discuss what you can do today to get on the right path of digital asset planning and where to look for guidance. This is an exploding area without a one-size-fits-all approach, but I hope that listening to this podcast will get you thinking. So, without further ado, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Jennifer Zegel. Welcome to the Retirement Cafe podcast, Jennifer Zegel.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here, and I'm really excited to talk about one of the subjects that's near and dear to my heart, digital asset planning.
Yeah.
So, I'm Jennifer Zegel, as you said, and I'm a U.S. attorney, and I specialize in estates and trusts, and I'm a partner at the law firm of Klein Bard, which is headquartered in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I do a traditional estates and trust practice, a lot of planning, creating wills, trusts, powers of attorney, helping with tax and gifting strategies, guiding people when someone passes on what to do in an estate or trust administration. But what makes me unique is that over the last few years, I've developed a subspecialty in digital asset planning. I'm also a member of the Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners, also known as STEP, and I am the co-deputy of the special interest group focused on digital assets in STEP, the STEP SIG for digital assets, which is great as well.
Yeah. Now we're used to dealing with step solicitors, as we call them in the UK, specialists again in wills and trusts and estate planning. But digital assets, I mean, this is kind of a new thing. Obviously, for hundreds of years, we've been passing on our property. We've been passing on our bricks and mortar or our chattels, our things inside our home or our jewelry or what have you to our whoever we want to pass them on to. But all of a sudden, in the last few years, we've got these things called digital assets. For those who kind of don't know the term, what's a digital asset?
So it's definitely not a user-friendly term. It is kind of a funny term, in and of itself. I mean, what is it? And the truth is it can be so many things, or it could be really nothing. And the definition of digital assets is going to change from jurisdiction to jurisdiction because there's no common definition right now. But I like to think about digital assets as it is our digital footprint. It is our collective digital memories, our photos, our videos, our social media accounts. It can also be tied to financial assets. It could be cryptocurrency or non-fungible tokens, NFTs, or digital collectibles, or even just accounts that are maintained and managed online that have some type of monetary component, to also just records stored online in a digital form, documents in a cloud, electronic communication such as email or text messages, websites, domain names. I mean, the list really goes on once you start thinking about it. And we haven't even touched on gaming or digital property rights or tokens. This area is just exploding. Now,
Yeah.
my area of expertise is in the United States and US laws regarding digital assets. So I can tell you under model legislation in the United States, which is called, wait for it, the Revised Uniform Fiduciary Access to Digital Assets Act. It's a mouthful. So it's commonly referred to as Rufata, which to me actually kind of sounds like a pet's name, like, come here, Rufata. I don't know. But anyway, that's the model legislation in the United States. And a majority of states have adopted some type of version of it. And in this model legislation, digital assets are defined as an electronic record in which an individual has a right or an interest. Now, it doesn't control an underlying asset or liability unless that asset or liability is also in digital and electronic form. So
Right.
I want to make clear that digital assets are not our computers and our smartphones and our devices. Digital assets are all of the pieces of information and data that are stored on those devices or stored in a cloud or maintained and accessed online.
Yeah. Now, there's a whole heap of stuff going on here in my head now, thinking about it. And of course, you know, my sister passed away a few years ago, and
I'm sorry to hear that.
I she was young and not kind of didn't realize that she was going to be close to her death, as maybe someone in their 80s and 90s maybe realizing and start to getting their affairs in order. And I know that for argument's sake that she had a Facebook account, and of course, there was a lot of confusion there because first of all, the Facebook account was securitized. It had a password on it, a privacy password, and there was a whole lot of like, well, okay, so how do we access maybe all those photos that she'd put on there because her family wanted to keep a record of those photographs, whereas in the old days, when we had our Kodak film printed out and our photo albums, we could just pass them on to whoever we wanted to do so. Of course, first of all, it hadn't been incorporated in her will. She hadn't even thought about that type of thing. She did have a will, which was fantastic. But just a simple fact of like those photographs, wanting to leave them to someone or even for the family to be able to get hold of them proved an inordinately difficult.
Yes, it is an arduous process, especially if pre-planning hasn't occurred. And while in the US, most states have, this model legislation, Rufata, that controls and gives a hierarchy for accessing digital assets and accounts. This is not everywhere. A lot of countries are still wrestling with how they're going to deal with digital assets and provide for a fiduciary person who's in charge with administering someone's estate, their access to digital assets. So you have two kind of layers here. You have a legal access component, and then you also have this kind of physical access component. Now, in most accounts like Facebook and other accounts that are controlled by service providers, there are terms of service agreements that govern who can access accounts and who can't, and then rules and rights, with regard to the accounts. And the majority of those terms of service agreements do not allow password sharing or having one person impersonate and log in as another user. And those are prohibitions under those terms of service agreements. So if people are sharing passwords, you're getting into breach of contract issues. There could be laws at country levels and state levels that also have prohibitions on using and sharing password information and logging into these types of service provider controlled accounts. So you have this backdrop of inconsistent laws and issues. And if somebody hasn't provided the requisite authorizations in estate planning documents, it can be a problem. Now, because of this problem, a lot of these service providers, some of the big ones, Google and Facebook and Apple, they have created this, what's called an online tool, which is an option with settings within their platform that you can allocate who you want to receive or transfer your information in your account, or who can control your account. So, for instance, Facebook has a digital legacy contact that you can designate in your Facebook account as to who could memorialize, if your page should be memorialized, and who can control it. Or if you just want that information taken down and deleted, the online tools have those types of options too. Now, online tools are great, but I do want to caution people that they should be done and utilized as part of an overall estate plan, because they can have meaningful impacts on a plan and having just general access to that information in the normal course.
Wow. Wow. There is a lot to think about straight away here, because I think a lot of people won't have even thought about, what happens. And then I'm thinking to myself, well, I used to buy compact discs. I was an avid fan. At a weekend, I would buy myself the latest album of whatever I chose. And then, of course, as Apple came along and I realized that I could have those 10,000 songs in my pocket, I diligently uploaded all those albums onto my Apple Music accounts, and in essence, the CDs have disappeared into the ether. I mean, I've still got some pocked away in a box somewhere, but really, my music collection is there. Now, what happens to that now?
So with specifically Apple accounts, Apple, it's very exciting, this year released their version of an online tool. I believe it's also called a legacy contact, although there is different terminology used by other service providers in connection with their online tools, which of course makes the matter even more complicated, trying to figure out what each service provider means, because they all can have a little bit of a variation. But with Apple's legacy contact, you can actually designate who could access certain types of information or receive part of your Apple account. Now, some of the music that you may have downloaded, that you may only have a lifetime license in those types of iTunes, so that might not be transferable. But some of it, if you had purchased it and you have kind of an album in there and it's not a license and you actually own it, sometimes that could be transferable. It really depends on the exact type of digital asset, but they have opened up a door to allow some of those items that you've purchased to carry on to other family members or those that might be in an Apple family share plan. So it's an emerging area, and I think we're going to continue to see this develop and evolve.
And even as we're chatting, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, my Audible accounts, which is my, for those who don't know what Audible, those are my online books that I listen to. And then I've got my Kindle reader, my electronic reader of all the books that I bought there. And all of a sudden the list goes on and on. And we haven't even got to this crypto assets.
Right. And on top of all of that, even with accounts that don't have a monetary value or sentimental value, a lot could just have personal information or be tied to a credit card. So having a list of where those accounts are located so they can be shut down is really important to help curb identity theft and cybersecurity crimes, which are also at an all-time high. So that's an even third kind of prong of this planning that people need to be mindful of in this, kind of dangerous digital world we live in.
Yeah. Gosh.
It boggles the mind.
Yeah, it does.
You're falling down the proverbial digital rabbit hole with me. I love
it. So, before we get to the kind of crypto and the NFTs and the non-fungible tokens and the blockchain technology, before we even go down that rabbit hole, what are just on the standard stuff that we know that probably an awful lot of people have got, that, like myself, with the Facebook account, and they've got the photographs on their phones and all the things that are held in the cloud. What are the steps that they should take around their estate planning and their will, etc.? Now, I appreciate you're talking. You're an expertise in American law, but there must be some kind of just some straightforward considerations that people should do if they pop along and see their step lawyer or step solicitor in the UK. What is it they should ask them to do and consider?
Sure, absolutely. So, Step one, I think, has just occurred for you. You've just become aware of all of these digital assets that you have. And once you have that kind of awareness and recognition, that's really what's going to prompt people to take action. Because if they don't think that there's a problem or that they could have a loss here, be it sentimental or monetary, they're not going to take any steps. I mean, it's hard to get people to do general estate planning, anyway, on top of adding this layer of digital asset planning. But once that crystallization has come through, documenting digital assets and accounts in a digital inventory is the very, very first step, so that there is some record of where, an executor could go to kind of look for where digital assets might be. So a digital asset inventory, shouldn't necessarily contain passwords. It shouldn't contain passwords, but it should contain, I have a social media account. This is my login or my handle. I have a Twitter account. I have, Venmo or PayPal or the equivalent of those kinds of money transfer services in the UK. I have an Etsy account that I run a small business. I mean, it can really get detailed, but setting forth all the email accounts, any type of subscriptions or loyalty programs and points, those would all be captured on a digital asset inventory, as well as the type of hardware you have. I have this laptop and this many devices and this many smartphones or this many wearables. Our wearables and our smartwatches are also holding a lot of personal information and data. And so we also need to track those. So having kind of a list that can be updated as more digital assets are accumulated and more hardware and tech is purchased is the first starting place. And then consulting with an attorney, versed in your jurisdiction in digital assets and estate planning, is also part of this process in making sure you have incorporated digital asset provisions and the requisite access, to these online accounts is important. But for people who want to do something today, who are, starting to get agita, thinking about all their digital assets and want to do something and, might not be able to get to the lawyer's office right away, there is something I'm going to tell you that you can do right now. And it's brought to you by STEP. STEP has done a fantastic job really raising awareness about the need for planning in the digital asset space. And they have created a memories campaign, which I mentioned online tools, and on their memories website, they have all of the different service providers and the online tools that are currently available and information on how a user can actually go into their own personal profiles and set up, whether they want to use these types of online tools or not. And there's a lot of clear guidance as well as a ton of other information on just general digital asset planning. Of course, you want to consult with an attorney because there can be meaningful impacts by using these tools within an estate plan. But I think that would be, kind of what somebody could do today in terms of getting on the path of digital asset planning.
Wow. Yeah, brilliant. We'll put some links in the show notes to that website. So, Jennifer, coming to the cryptocurrencies and the NFTs and the Bitcoins and this type of thing, I'm not an expert in that field at all, but I'm just thinking this is even more complex about how you actually would give access or be able to transfer. I mean, those assets have got real monetary value, of course, and maybe significant monetary value held in those types of accounts. How is it panning out for these types of assets?
So I think with more complex digital assets, and certainly those that have a lot higher of a value, specialists definitely have to be brought into the digital asset planning conversation. And, I'm not a technologist. I know enough about how technology works to be dangerous, but also, of course, to know when I need to bring in a technologist who's going to help build not only an estate plan, but a technical management plan that would go along with an estate plan. Now, these wouldn't be things that would be incorporated into a will that could be a public document, but these are things that are, kind of side information and protocols as to how to actually access the thing, once there's legal access established. And so the nature of cryptocurrency and NFTs is in the issue with planning for them is really how that type of asset is stored and then accessed. So, to just give a real high level, cryptocurrency can be held, by a public exchange, and the exchange is responsible for the alphanumeric codes, which are these like digital keys, a long string of numbers and letters to actually access where the cryptocurrency is located on a blockchain. But if you're not using a public exchange, somebody can essentially be their own bank and self-custody their own digital assets and maintain, the information with their own private keys. But the problem is, if they lose the information for the private keys, there is no reset button. There is no ability to regain access to those digital assets if somebody is storing, the information that governs access, personally. So I had people tell me that they've gotten tattoos of the private keys, on their body, that they've had that information put on paper and put in a safe deposit box. I've had others tell me that they've etched it onto fireproof stainless steel plates to protect that information. So there's no perfect solution right now. And I think a lot of tech companies and some of the bigger financial institutions are racing to try to find a way to more securely and safely hold on to this information. But it is an emerging area, and it's exciting to see how this is going to play out, especially, as countries put in more laws and regulations in place to govern access and control of digital assets.
Yeah. I mean, I just know about a couple of cases. There was a chap who was running a Canadian exchange who disappeared under strange circumstances in India, and I know that they never recovered his keys. And then there's a guy more locally here in the UK, in Wales, who keeps asking his local council to unearth the local, what we call the local tip, because buried underneath in the landfill, buried somewhere, there is a hard drive that he thinks is worth many millions.
Yes.
And he can't recover it, and of course he's alive, let alone dead. So yeah, there is it comes with significant challenges, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And, even for throwing out a hard drive that shouldn't have been thrown out, just human error, to potential fraud that's gone on at, an extremely high level in this space, there's all types of issues and pitfalls. And the story that you talked about with the Canadian fellow, his name is Gerald Cotton. And
Right.
I am extremely fascinated, by that whole case. And for those of you, kind of unfamiliar, to put a little bit more color on it, because I think it's just such an interesting story. Jerry founded the largest cryptocurrency exchange at one time in Canada, called Quadriga CX. And he was running it alone from his laptop. And he and his girlfriend, who later became his wife, were just traveling all around the world, living this exotic, luxurious lifestyle. He's running the business from his laptop. They got married, and then a few weeks later, he died in India. I think the official reason for death is, an issue with his Crohn's disease that he was known to have, that got accelerated over there. And he died in December of 2018. But when his wife came back to Canada, they didn't tell anybody for a month that he was gone. And the company was still taking deposits. And then eventually it had to come out that he was gone, and that initially they thought that the private keys he held to maintain what was thought to be around $250 million in client funds was trapped inside his encrypted laptop. Now, fast forward, the company went into bankruptcy. The widow raised an estate for him in Halifax. And all of these authorities and the Canadian investigators and taxing units and even the FBI got involved. And long story short, they concluded that he essentially had been running a Ponzi scheme, and that the $250 million that they thought was trapped in his encrypted laptop had actually been transferred out of the Quadriga wallets months before his trip to India. So there's a lot of speculation on whether he's even, really dead or not. And there was even a petition that the court ultimately denied to exhume his body to check if the DNA, in the body that was buried was actually his. So the story is a gift that keeps on giving. And I actually use it as a case study in a book that I published earlier this year with my co-author Sharon Hartung on this topic, which I'm sure we'll get to.
Absolutely. Well, we can talk a little bit more about that. This is your book, Digital Asset Entanglement: Unraveling the Intersection of Estate Laws and Technology. I mean, that's a mouthful in itself, and I can imagine quite a project to take on. Tell me more about writing the book.
So it was a labor of love that Sharon and I worked on for over a year, and we both fell in love with the Quadriga case, and we used it to kind of, if the topic of digital asset planning wasn't interesting enough, we used it to really highlight some of the pitfalls and also help develop a framework for global advisors to use to incorporate digital asset planning into their traditional estate planning practice. And so the case study really helps illustrate our framework and how we can plan for this area. And what we did is we really broke down analyzing a client's digital behaviors to help determine how to tease out questions that will be applicable for the digital planning process. So we created 6 personas in the book, from a basic user to a super user. And we go through each persona with a backdrop of the case to really help showcase, the different questions and issues that would arise, based on someone's behavior. So for instance, a basic user, this is somebody that may have a couple email accounts. Maybe they have a social media profile, some videos and photos online. Maybe they have one cloud account that they're storing some documents, and potentially could be running some household bill pay functions online. But they don't have an Etsy business. They're not, doing online sales. They don't have an online business or cryptocurrency or other, more unique digital assets. And so by helping really think about someone's behavior, that's how we develop this persona framework, which there can be personas that overlap, and the personas we created are certainly non-exhaustive. And as technology continues to emerge, we're going to have the additional personas that develop. But this is kind of just a practical approach for advisors to begin the conversation with clients.
Yeah. I can imagine, and I don't know this, but I can imagine this is a conversation that a lot of people listening to this podcast won't have had with their solicitors in the UK, where predominantly our audience is from. So it definitely sounds like it is a conversation that needs to be had, and of course maybe to make sure that their attorneys, their lawyers have got the right knowledge to be able to advise them, of course, about the assets that they hold in the UK and the rules and regulations that will apply.
Absolutely. It is not a one-size-fits-all approach, because there can be just so many different types of usage that someone engages in online activities and, digital assets. But beginning the conversation, is really important. And I think even advisors who, feel like this is a really complicated area, are scared, don't know where to get started. I think recognizing, the need to talk about this at even a basic level is important, and then finding and identifying, practitioners in their jurisdiction, if there are more complex situations that they can go to consult. With other areas of estate planning, if you need special tax advice, or if there's novel real estate or other issues, we go to other experts for consultation and guidance. And I think, especially as digital assets can be more complex for a certain client, that needs to be part of the protocol and part of the team, that we develop.
So Jennifer, you've also got a podcast, the Digital Planning Podcast. It's got in its 4th season now. So tell me about that. Where did that idea come from?
So the Digital Planning Podcast is co-created and co-hosted by myself and 2 other estate planning attorneys who are also US-based attorneys. And we started it in 2019 because we saw that there was a real need for practitioners to have a place where they could be educated and come to learn about this emerging topic. So the podcast is really intended to, discuss all things digital in connection with estate planning, business planning, and estate administration. And, it's funny because that's exactly how I met Sharon. When we launched the podcast in 2019, she had a Google alert set up for digital assets, and the podcast came up, and she reached out, and kind of the rest is history. We soon became quick friends and colleagues. But we slowly started to see other people from around the world who have an interest in this area begin to follow us, and we've had some fantastic guests. We had Google on to talk about their online tool, which is called an inactive account manager. We've had some leading crypto planning attorneys. Pamela Morgan is a U.S. attorney in this space who's come on to talk about more detailed crypto planning. We've had Pennsylvania state senators come on to talk about Pennsylvania's version of, RUFADA, that model legislation I mentioned earlier. And we've also had the CEO of Two Oceans Trust, which is the first trust company in the United States in Wyoming to actually custody cryptocurrency in a trust account. And we've had a lot of other business leaders on, and also the three hosts. We've had some great roundtable discussions about planning in this area, from everything from what is blockchain technology to electronically signed wills and NFTs and planning considerations. And we actually dropped an episode recently on the metaverse, which is a whole other topic in and of itself.
Yeah. Wow. And then my brain is racing away as per usual, and I'm thinking to myself, YouTube. Wow. If you've got a YouTube account, you get royalties. I get a few pounds every month from the small audience that I have on YouTube, but I do get paid by YouTube. What happens to that royalty when I'm dead? How does it keep getting paid? Now, of course, there are people who've made their fortunes on YouTube, and we're talking significant money they're going to get paid on a monthly basis. And of course, their videos stay current for an awful long time. I mean, you may know the answer to this already, but what happens to that?
So, classic attorney answer, it depends. It depends on the royalty agreements that a person has. It depends on their personal plan. Are they getting this through a business? Is it through, individual accounts? How have they set up the transfer of that information and data? If it is through a company, are there trademarks and copyrights and other intellectual property interests in the mix? So can you have a right to assign royalties and other types of economic interests? So all of those things come into play in analyzing the best strategies for planning in this area. But what's also emerging that, we haven't even really touched on is this whole concept of post-mortem privacy rights. What rights do we have in our voice and in our likenesses, and in having people use or try to capitalize on our digital likeness? And that law is not well developed. It's inconsistent. I mean, the United States doesn't really recognize post-mortem privacy rights except for, certain celebrities and other things that might be protected under intellectual property. But other countries are also wrestling with this. And some countries do have more express post-mortem privacy rights, but that's a whole other part of this conundrum in planning in this area. So you've touched on, a whole other separate subtopic that's very important.
Wow.
You're going deep. You're going deep.
Yeah. No,
deep down
Jennifer,
the hole.
It's been fascinating talking to you, and I love it when we probably have caused more questions than answers, but actually, even if those questions then take you somewhere to do something about it by getting advice for yourself or for thinking about what you want to happen to the things that you've got, even if it's, if you've got a recording of all your photographs on a social media account, maybe you want to make sure that they are downloaded to a personal drive that you can pass on directly to your grandchildren or your children, what have you. But actually taking some action and some thought around your own digital assets. I think it's been a fascinating conversation, and you really opened up, shone some lights down those rabbit holes for us all. So it's been fascinating talking to you. I really do appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you very much, Jennifer Zegel.
Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure, and let's keep the digital asset conversation going.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Thank you to Jennifer for taking the time to chat with me today about her work into unravelling what is a digital asset and digital asset planning. Head over to the show notes on our website at theretirementcafe.co.uk for links to Jennifer's digital planning podcast and the guidance offered by Step, as well as details of her book, Digital Asset Entanglement, Unravelling the Intersection of Estate Laws and Technology. The book is really aimed at financial planners and solicitors looking to help their clients with this complex topic. As ever, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, as it really helps more people like you find us. You may know that I post all the episodes of my YouTube channel, which you can find out the username at Justin King. For those who prefer to watch, why not head over there to subscribe so you never miss an episode. So until next time, I'm Justin King, helping you feel more informed in your retirement.